Avoidants have genuinely dysfunctional relational patterns. Those patterns cause genuine harm to the people who love them. And the harm does not become less serious because the patterns have understandable psychological origins. Both things are true simultaneously. And the both things true framing has, in many conversations about avoidant attachment, functioned to consistently prioritize the compassionate understanding of the avoidant over the honest acknowledgement of the damage. This conversation is going to be more honest than that. The first honest thing is that the patterns are genuinely serious, not quirks, not the ordinary relational imperfections that every person carries into their connections. Genuinely serious patterns that, when unaddressed, produce specific and substantial harm to the people who are in relationship with someone who has them. The chronic emotional unavailability is serious. The consistent, ongoing, pattern-level failure to be genuinely present in the emotional dimension of an intimate relationship is not a minor relational difficulty. It is the absence of one of the primary things that intimate relationships are supposed to provide. Sustained over time, it produces the specific, cumulative, seriously damaging effects that have been described throughout this series of conversations. The erosion of perceptual confidence, the pre-qualification of legitimate need, the distorted baseline for what adequate love looks like, the hypervigilance. These are real psychological harms. They do not resolve automatically when the relationship ends. They require specific, genuine, often supported work to address. The intermittent reinforcement is serious. The specific, neurologically potent combination of unpredictable warmth and withdrawal that avoidant dynamics produce is not a minor feature of the relational experience. It is one of the most effective mechanisms for creating the kind of attachment that is most difficult to leave and most damaging to sustain. The bond it creates is powerful. The harm of the bond being created through this specific mechanism, rather than through consistent, available, genuinely meeting the other person warmth, is real and documented and genuinely serious. The consistent management of the other person's honest communication, as pressure requiring handling rather than information requiring genuine engagement, is serious. It systematically treats the partner's accurate perception as the problem rather than as the honest reporting it is. Over time, it teaches the partner to doubt their own accurate read of their own situation. That is serious harm. These patterns, taken together, are not small. They are not the ordinary difficulties of loving a complicated person. They are specific, identifiable, consistently producing harm patterns that deserve to be named as what they are. The second honest thing is about fixing, about whether you can fix an avoidant. You cannot. This is not a controversial claim. It is the plain, unavoidable, psychologically accurate truth that the compassion-forward framing of avoidant attachment has consistently softened past the point of honest usefulness. You cannot fix an avoidant because fixing requires the person being fixed to be the one doing the fixing. The defensive architecture that produces avoidant patterns is not external to the avoidant. It is not something that exists between you and them that your behavior can address from the outside. It is their interior, their nervous system. Their deeply encoded, formative experience produced, decades-old way of relating to the approach of genuine intimacy. The work of changing it lives entirely within that interior, requires the avoidant's own genuine, active, specific, ongoing engagement with what the patterns are, and what they cost, and what interrupting them at the behavioral level actually requires. This work cannot be done by loving them patiently, cannot be done by understanding their psychology deeply, cannot be done by being the right partner in the right configuration that finally makes them feel safe enough to change. It can only be done by them, through the specific, demanding, often uncomfortable work of someone who has genuinely decided that the patterns are costing something they are no longer willing to cost, and who is actively, behaviorally, instance by instance doing something different. Most avoidants do not do this work. This is also an honest thing that the compassion-forward framing consistently underemphasizes. Change is possible. Genuine change in avoidant attachment patterns through genuine sustained work is real and available. And most avoidants, most of the time, do not do the genuine sustained work. They may develop intellectual fluency with the language of attachment theory, may acquire the vocabulary of their own patterns, may demonstrate enough self-awareness to describe exactly what they do without that self-awareness producing meaningful behavioral change. The intellectual understanding of a pattern is not the change. The behavioral interruption of the pattern, in the specific daily moments when the pattern activates, is the change. And the behavioral interruption is genuinely hard and genuinely rare. The third honest thing is about what happens to the people who try to fix avoidance anyway. The trying to fix dynamic is one of the most costly available positions in intimate relationships. Not because fixing is inherently wrong, because fixing someone who has not decided to be fixed requires the fixer to continuously compensate for the unfixed person's patterns, to absorb what the patterns produce, to do the emotional labor of two people while providing the conditions for one person's change without that change being required by the conditions. The person trying to fix an avoidant typically ends up doing more and more of the relational work over time rather than less. More accommodation, more patience, more generous interpretation of behavior that deserves more direct assessment, more absorbing of the gap between what is needed and what is provided. The fixing attempt, sustained over time, tends to produce not the change it is attempting to create, but the specific cumulative, seriously costly experience of someone who has been giving everything and receiving the insufficient configuration in return. This is not a failure of the person trying to fix. It is the predictable, consistent, entirely foreseeable result of attempting the unfixable from the outside. The patterns that produce avoidant behavior are interior and require interior work. External patience and external love and external understanding are not the materials that interior change is made from. The fourth honest thing requires the most care because it contains something true that can be misused if it is not held carefully. Avoidants are genuinely difficult to be in relationship with. Not because they are bad people, because the patterns they are running are genuinely incompatible with the conditions that genuine intimate relationship requires. Genuine intimate relationship requires consistent emotional availability. Avoidant patterns produce chronic emotional unavailability. These are directly incompatible. The chronic emotional unavailability does not become less incompatible with the conditions that genuine intimate relationship requires because it has comprehensible psychological origins. Genuine intimate relationship requires the capacity to stay present in the difficult moments, rather than withdrawing from them. Avoidant patterns produce reliable withdrawal at exactly the moments that require staying present. These are directly incompatible. Genuine intimate relationship requires the capacity to repair ruptures honestly and with genuine engagement. Avoidant patterns produce the management of ruptures rather than genuine repair. Directly incompatibility is structural, not personal. Not about the specific people in the relationship, about the specific requirements of genuine intimate relationship encountering the specific outputs of unaddressed avoidant patterns. The encounter produces the characteristic dynamic that this entire series of conversations has been describing. Not because either person is inadequate, because the requirements and the outputs are genuinely incompatible. This is the honest thing that the compassion-forward framing consistently works around. The patterns are not difficult, they are genuinely incompatible with genuine intimate relationship. Not always, not permanently, not without the possibility of genuine change making them less incompatible over time. But in their unaddressed form, as they actually operate, they are genuinely incompatible with what genuine intimate relationship requires. Now, the honest thing about you in all of this, you are not the problem. The title of this conversation says avoidants are messed up and you cannot fix them. The first part is true in the specific, serious, not minimizing sense described above. The second part is also true, and it is important, but the implication that sometimes follows from it, that you should have known this sooner, that the trying to fix was foolish, that the sustained investment in something that was not changing was a failure of judgment, that implication is not honest. You invested in something that appeared to contain something real. Because it did contain something real. The genuine feeling was real. The connection had genuine depth. The unguarded moments were genuinely extraordinary. The avoidance actual capacity for connection, visible in the fear offline moments, was genuinely present. You were not wrong to invest in something real. You were not foolish to believe in the possibility of genuine change. You were not naive to love someone who was demonstrating, in the best moments, something that deserved to be loved. What was costly was the specific, extended sustaining of the investment, past the point where the honest assessment of the evidence was clearly pointing toward the conclusion that the investment was not producing the change that would make it sustainable. Not because you are weak or foolish, because genuine feeling in the context of genuine connection is a powerful thing that does not yield easily to honest assessment. Because the extraordinary moments were real, and the hoping they represented something buildable was not unreasonable, the recognition that you cannot fix an avoidant is not the recognition that you were wrong to try. It is the recognition that the trying was never the right tool for the actual problem. The actual problem required the avoidant's own work. The trying, however sustained and however genuine, was addressing something it was never equipped to address. What is true about avoidance, said plainly without the softening that has characterized most of the compassion-forward conversation? They take more than they give in the specific emotional daily life of the relationship sense. The investment differential is real. The comfortable configuration running on the other person's investment while providing insufficient return is the characteristic, not the exception. They cause genuine psychological harm to their partners through the specific sustained operation of patterns that erode perceptual confidence and distort baselines and produce chronic activation. The harm is not intentional. It is also not minor. Both things are true. They tend to underestimate the significance of what they are receiving from their partners while overestimating their own contribution to the dynamic. The self-sufficiency narrative that positions them as needing less and contributing less than equal as somehow equitable is not honest. It is the narrative that allows the taking for granted to feel sustainable. They frequently use psychological self-awareness as a substitute for behavioral change, rather than as the beginning of it. The avoidant who can describe their patterns fluently while continuing to run them is not in a different position from the avoidant who cannot describe them. The description is not the change. And most importantly, for the purposes of honest assessment, genuine change in avoidant attachment patterns is possible and real and genuinely rare. The avoidants who do the actual, specific behavioral instance-level work of interrupting the patterns represent a small portion of the people who carry avoidant attachment. Most avoidants, most of the time, do not do this work. This is not hopeless. Change is possible for the person who genuinely does the genuine work. But the honest assessment of the probability should inform the expectations that people bring to relationships with avoidance, rather than the optimistic framing that consistently positions the possibility of change as more likely than the evidence supports. The honest conclusion of this conversation is not the elevated arrival narrative version. It is the plain, direct, genuinely useful version. Avoidants have genuinely serious relational patterns that cause genuine harm. You cannot fix those patterns from the outside. The fixing, if it happens, requires their work. Most of them do not do that work. This does not mean avoidants are irredeemably bad people. They are people with genuinely serious patterns who are responsible for the harm those patterns cause, regardless of the pattern's origins. Both things simultaneously. It means the cost of being in relationship with an unaddressed avoidant is genuinely serious and not adequately compensated for by the genuine feeling underneath the pattern. The feeling being real is not sufficient justification for the ongoing absorption of the pattern's harm. It means you cannot love someone into changing their fundamental relational architecture, cannot patience someone into it, cannot understand someone into it, can only be present for it if and when they choose it for themselves. And the choosing is rare. That is the honest accounting. Not softened, not wrapped in enough compassion to lose its edges. Plain. The patterns are serious. You cannot fix them, the work is theirs. Most of them do not do it. And you, the person who loved genuinely and absorbed the pattern and finally arrived at the honest assessment, you deserve to take the honest assessment seriously rather than continuing to manage it toward the hope that something different is coming. The honest assessment has been earned. Use it. The honest accounting deserves continuation, and the continuation requires something that the previous section was building toward, but did not quite arrive at. The honest examination of what comes after the plain recognition that avoidants have serious patterns and you cannot fix them. Because the recognition, however honest and however necessary, is not the destination, it is the clearing of the ground, and what gets built on the cleared ground is the part that actually matters for your daily life going forward. The cleared ground looks like this. You are no longer organizing your understanding of the dynamic around the question of how to reach the avoidant, how to be the person who finally breaks through, how to configure yourself in the way that finally produces the consistent version of the person who was so fully present in the unguarded moments. That question has been retired, not because you gave up on something real, but because you arrived at the honest assessment that the question was never yours to answer. The breaking through was always their work. The consistent version was always dependent on their choice to do that work. The configuration that would finally produce it does not exist outside of their own genuine interior engagement with what is preventing it. The cleared ground also looks like the honest retirement of the hope that sustained investment in an insufficient dynamic would eventually produce sufficient return without the avoidant doing the specific work that sufficient return requires. That hope was not foolish when it was held. It was grounded in the real evidence of the genuine feeling underneath the patterns. It was the reasonable, love-informed response to genuine depth that the dynamic genuinely contained. It has now been updated by the fuller evidence. The fuller evidence says the genuine feeling does not automatically produce the behavioral change that makes the feeling livable. The genuine feeling and the adequate expression of it require two different things. The first is present. The second requires work that was not being done. The cleared ground is not comfortable. Cleared ground rarely is initially. It has the specific, slightly exposed quality of a space that has been emptied of the thing that was filling it, even when the thing that was filling it was causing damage. The hoping was costly, it was also organizing, gave the days a specific orientation, gave the investment a direction, gave the emotional energy somewhere to go. The cleared ground does not yet have the thing that replaces the organizing. That takes time to build. What gets built on the cleared ground deserves honest description rather than the elevated narrative of self-reclamation that these conversations have occasionally moved toward. It is ordinary things, not extraordinary things, not the dramatic arrival at a new version of yourself that the difficulty produced. Ordinary things gradually becoming more genuinely yours as the orientation that was consuming them returns to its actual home. The morning that begins with your own genuine thoughts rather than the low-level monitoring of a dynamic. Not every morning immediately. Some mornings still begin with the pull toward the old orientation. But gradually, with accumulation, more mornings that are simply mornings, belonging to whatever the day actually contains, rather than to the question of what the dynamic's current configuration means. The friendship that receives more of your actual attention, because the bandwidth that was perpetually allocated to the dynamic has started to free up in small increments. The conversation with someone who is genuinely present for it, that has the specific, slightly unfamiliar quality of two people actually meeting each other, rather than one person navigating carefully around the other person's defended interior. The work or the project or the creative engagement that had been getting the residual attention after the dynamics requirements were met, now getting something more like actual primary attention. The quality of the engagement shifting because the person doing the engaging is more fully there. These are not dramatic. They are the actual texture of a life being gradually reclaimed from the specific, consuming, ongoing demands of a dynamic that was running at your expense. Something needs to be said about anger, because the honest recognition that avoidants have serious patterns that cause genuine harm, and that you cannot fix those patterns, and that most avoidants do not do the work that would produce genuine change. This honest recognition produces something in many people that has not been adequately named in this conversation. It produces legitimate anger, not the performed anger of someone who has decided that anger is the appropriate response and is generating it accordingly. The specific, real, arrived at through honest assessment anger of someone who finally allows themselves to be straightforwardly angry about something that genuinely warrants it. The sustained experience of having your honest perception consistently managed towards uncertainty warrants anger. The specific, cumulative experience of legitimate need being consistently reframed as emotional pressure warrants anger. The chronic investment of genuine, generous, fully present caring in something that was consistently returning insufficient reciprocation warrants anger. The specific harm done to your perceptual confidence and your baseline for what adequate love looks like and your relationship with your own legitimate needs warrants anger. These things happened. They had genuine cost. The cost was real and specific, and the honest accounting of it includes a recognition that the cost was not neutral, was not simply the ordinary difficulty of a complicated relationship, was the specific output of patterns that were running at your expense. The anger that recognition produces is legitimate. It deserves to be felt rather than bypassed in the rush toward the more elevated emotions that the narrative of growth and self-reclamation tends to prefer. Anger is useful. It is the emotion most directly connected to the honest recognition that something wrong occurred, that something was taken that should not have been taken, that something was cost that should not have been cost. Anger in this context is not bitterness, is not the hardening of someone who is closing against the possibility of genuine future connection. It is the honest, appropriate, entirely proportionate response of someone whose accurate assessment of what happened includes the recognition that what happened was not okay. Let the anger be what it is, without rushing it toward the more palatable emotion on the other side of it, without using the compassionate framing of avoidant psychology to bypass the legitimate anger before it has done its honest work. The anger is part of the honest accounting. It belongs in the accounting. The specific harm that avoidant patterns cause also deserves more direct treatment than this conversation has given it. The elevated language has been describing the harm in framing that is accurate, but sometimes indirect. Here is the direct version. Having your honest perception consistently treated as the problem, rather than as the accurate read it, causes real damage to your capacity to trust yourself. This is not a minor effect. The capacity to trust your own perception of your own situation is foundational to functioning well in every area of your life. Its erosion through the sustained experience of being in a dynamic that consistently positioned your accurate perception as emotional excess has real, daily, practical consequences that extend far beyond the relationship itself. Having your legitimate relational needs consistently reframed as demands or pressure causes real damage to your relationship with those needs. It teaches you, through repetition, to pre-qualify your needs before expressing them, to apologize for having them, to accept as adequate something that is not adequate because the asking for adequate has been consistently treated as excessive. The distortion of your sense of what you are entitled to need from a relationship is real harm. It requires real work to address. Having your emotional investment consistently met with insufficient reciprocation over an extended period causes real damage to your nervous system's calibration. The chronic low-level activation of an unpredictable relational environment leaves traces. The hypervigilance that developed as the adaptive response to navigating genuine unpredictability does not automatically deactivate when the unpredictable environment is no longer present. It requires specific, patient, often supported work to recalibrate. These are not traumatic harms. They are not the kind of harm that is easily pointed to and validated by others, because they are quiet and cumulative and not organized around a single identifiable incident. But they are real, and they are specific, and they are the direct output of avoidant patterns operating consistently over time on a person who was genuinely invested in something real. The part that needs to be said about healing from this specific kind of harm is that it is not primarily about the avoidant. This sounds obvious, and it is one of the consistently most difficult practical realities of the aftermath. The healing requires addressing what happened to your perception, your relationship with your needs, your nervous system's calibration. None of these things are addressed primarily by understanding the avoidance psychology better. The understanding of the avoidance psychology was useful for the accurate accounting of what happened. It is not the primary material that healing is made from. The primary material that healing is made from is different and more personal. It is the patient, specific, honest work of restoring trust in your own accurate perception. Not the abstract declaration of trust in yourself, the specific daily instance-level practice of noticing the accurate read before the pre-qualification reflex has managed it towards uncertainty, and letting the accurate read be what it is. Recognizing when the pre-qualification reflex is operating and choosing in that specific moment to trust the perception rather than qualify it, it is the equally specific work of restoring your relationship with your own legitimate needs. Noticing when the apologizing for needing reflex is operating. Recognizing the difference between the legitimate need being excessive and the legitimate need having been trained to present itself as excessive by the consistent experience of the dynamic treating it as such. Allowing the legitimate need to be legitimate rather than pre-reducing it to something the available container can hold without discomfort. It is the gradual, patient recalibration of the nervous system toward the actual conditions of the present rather than the historical conditions of the dynamic. This is the slowest part and the least amenable to deliberate effort. It happens through the accumulated experience of present conditions that are genuinely different from the historical ones. Through enough exposure to consistent, available, not unpredictable relational environments that the nervous system's calibration gradually updates to the current reality. The title of this conversation promised something blunt. Avoidants are messed up and you cannot fix them. The bluntness was warranted. The patterns are genuinely serious. The fixing is genuinely not available from the outside. Both of those things are true and deserve to be said plainly, rather than softened into something more comfortable. What the bluntness was always pointing toward, and what this continuation has been building toward, is the honest, practical, forward-facing reality of what you do with the plain truth. You stop trying to fix what is not yours to fix. You direct the genuine, extraordinary capacity for caring and understanding and patient investment that the dynamic was consuming toward things that can actually receive it properly. You do the specific, unglamorous, patient work of restoring what the dynamic's patterns damaged in you. And you build, incrementally and without the dramatic narrative of transformation, the ordinary life that was always more worth your primary investment than the monitoring of someone else's defended interior. That is the plain conclusion. Not elevated, not arrived at through the accumulation of resonant language. Simply the honest, direct, actually useful conclusion of a plain conversation about a real thing. The patterns are serious, you cannot fix them, the work is theirs, most do not do it, and you have your life to live. With the honest assessment, in the direction that is genuinely yours, that is enough. It has always been enough, let's be honest for a second, and I mean actually honest. Not the kind of honest that comes wrapped in so much compassion and psychological framing that by the end of it you somehow feel sorry for the person who hurt you. The kind of honest that just says the thing, avoidants are messed up, and you cannot fix them. There, that's the conversation. Now let's talk about why that's true, and why knowing it actually matters for your life. Here's the thing about avoidant attachment that nobody wants to say out loud. The patterns are not small. They are not quirks. They are not the ordinary imperfections that every human being carries into relationships. They are serious, genuinely serious. The chronic emotional unavailability. The pulling away right when you get close. The warmth that appears and disappears on a schedule you cannot predict. The way your honest feelings keep getting treated like they are too much. The way you keep reaching and reaching and reaching, and somehow you are always the one doing the reaching. That is not a small thing to live inside. That is a specific kind of exhausting that settles into your bones. That makes you start questioning whether you are the problem. Whether you are too sensitive, whether you need too much. You do not need too much. You need the minimum, and the minimum kept not being provided. The reason most people stay in these dynamics longer than they should is not stupidity. It is not weakness. It is the fact that the genuine feeling was real. And this is the part that makes avoidant dynamics so specifically brutal. The connection was real. The unguarded moments were real. The specific quality of being seen by this person in the moments when the walls came down, that was real. You were not imagining it. But here is what is also true. Real feeling and adequate behavior are not the same thing. Someone can genuinely feel something for you and still be running patterns that are causing you serious ongoing harm. Both of those things can be true at the same time. The feeling does not cancel the harm. The harm does not cancel the feeling. They exist simultaneously. And you have to hold both honestly rather than using one to erase the other. Now, the fixing, you cannot do it. Full stop. End of that sentence. Not because you are not smart enough or patient enough or loving enough. Because fixing is an inside job. The defensive architecture that produces avoidant behavior lives in their nervous system, in their body, in decades of conditioned response to the approach of genuine closeness. You cannot reach that from the outside. You cannot love it into changing. You cannot understand it into changing. You cannot be patient enough or available enough or perfectly calibrated enough to make it change. The only thing that changes it is the avoidant themselves deciding to do the actual difficult daily work of interrupting the pattern at the moment it activates. In the specific moment when the closeness gets real and the impulse to withdraw fires, choosing to stay instead, over and over, until the groove of the new choice starts to compete with the groove of the old one. That is the work. It is their work. You cannot do it for them. You have been trying to do it for them, and it has not worked. Not because you failed, because it was never possible from your position. Most avoidants do not do this work. That is the uncomfortable statistical reality that the compassionate framing of avoidant psychology consistently underemphasizes. Change is possible, genuinely possible. Some avoidants do the real work and become genuinely different in their relationships. That is real, but most do not. Most acquire the vocabulary without the behavioral change. Most can describe their patterns fluently while continuing to run them. Most use the self-awareness as a kind of substitute for the actual unglamorous instance-level daily work of doing something different. Knowing this should inform your expectations, not destroy your hope for people in general. Inform your expectations about this specific person based on this specific evidence in front of you. Here is what the harm actually looks like, not the elevated poetic version, the plain version. Your honest perception of your own situation has been treated as the problem so many times that you now doubt your honest perception. You second-guess the accurate read before it can become the basis for action. That is real damage. Your legitimate needs have been reframed as too much so consistently that you pre-apologize for having them. You qualify them before you express them. You make yourself smaller before you have even opened your mouth. That is real damage. Your nervous system has been living in the chronic low-level activation of an unpredictable relational environment for long enough that the hypervigilance has become your baseline. The constant monitoring, the reading of the room, the bracing for the next shift in temperature, that is real damage. None of this heals automatically when the relationship ends. It requires specific, honest work, not dramatic work. Specific, daily, unglamorous work. And now the part about you. You are not the problem. You are not too much. Your needs were not excessive. Your perception was not distorted by your own emotional involvement. You were accurate. You were generous beyond what the situation deserved. You stayed longer than was healthy because the genuine feeling was real, and you are the kind of person who takes genuine feelings seriously. That quality, taking genuine feelings seriously, investing fully, loving without the armor, is not the thing that needs to change. It is one of the genuinely valuable things about you. The thing that needs to change is where you direct it. It deserves to go somewhere that can receive it properly, not somewhere that takes it for granted, not somewhere that runs a comfortable configuration on the fuel of your investment, while returning insufficient warmth. Somewhere that meets it, daily, in the ordinary moments. On the unremarkable Tuesday when nothing is charged and nothing is at stake, and the showing up happens anyway because the showing up is what love actually looks like when it is working. You cannot fix an avoidant. You never could. The time you spent trying was not wasted. It built real things in you, real clarity, real self-knowledge, real understanding of what you need and what you will not accept again. But the trying is done now. The cleared ground is yours. Build something on it that is actually yours. Something that does not require you to manage your own honest perception into uncertainty in order to survive inside it. Something that meets your legitimate needs without requiring them to be pre-qualified into something smaller. Something that is not organized around the monitoring of someone else's emotional temperature as the primary activity of your days. Something real. You know what real feels like. You felt it in the unguarded moments. Now go find it somewhere it can be the daily reality, instead of the intermittent exception. That is the whole thing. That is all of it.